Hello, hello. There we go. Okay. Make sure my stuff is, sorry. My screen is acting crazy. So hopefully that's right. Sorry. How are y'all doing? Happy Friday, everybody. I hope that you're having a good start towards your weekend. I gotta slide this up. Sorry. Maybe that's better. Okay, sorry. I should have fixed that before I got on here. All right, but I wanted to get back on here and finish up Jonah chapter 1. A couple days ago, I got on here and I talked about avoiding God's will simply because you don't like it. And that's where we started in Jonah is God told Jonah to go talk to Nineveh, and he didn't like those people. He didn't think that they deserved God's grace, and they didn't deserve forgiveness. They didn't deserve to be, given grace for their, he wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to have something, to have the vengeance and the justice that came because of their own actions done to them. So he didn't want to go to Nineveh. So he got on a boat and went to Tarshish. And I talked about how he wasn't even convicted about the fact that he was on the boat going the opposite direction that God was sending him. And I stopped at verse 6 because there was so much in those first 6 verses about just hating people that you think deserve what they've got coming to them. And I think if that's not any more relevant in our world right now, then you are simply just blind and not paying attention. I can't speak enough to the fact that just because you dislike somebody, regardless if they deserve your dislike for something they've done to you personally, or if you just have hate in your heart for no reason, that is still no reason to withhold the gospel from them and not to do for them what God is asking you to do simply because you don't like the way it looks. That's what we talked about 2 days ago. But I want to talk about the other people in the boat today. It said Jonah went to Joppa, got on the boat, paid his money, went downstairs and went to sleep while they were on their way to Tarshish. Remember, Nineveh is over here. This is where he was. Tarshish is over there. He is fleeing from God. He's going the opposite direction of where God told him to go. And so he didn't even consider the fact that he was running from God, that it would affect the other people on the boat with him. And so my question today is, who's on the boat with you? What are you running from? And who have you got in the boat with you? And so we're going to pick up, let's pick up in verse 5. And we're going to read and then we'll talk about it. So this is Jonah chapter 1, verse 5. All the sailors were afraid and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below the deck where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us who is responsible for making all this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased." And they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Okay. So Jonah gets on the boat. He's running from God. He's taking a nap. He's hanging out. He thinks, it's fine. I ran from God. It's okay. All is well. I'm going to go take a nap, and I'm just going to forget all this happened. When I wake up, I'm going to be in Tarshish, and this is just not going to be an issue anymore. Well, he gets woke up by the captain because there's a horrible storm going on, and they are about to, the ship is about to sink, the ship is about to break apart. They are clearly not worshipers of God, because it said each of them were crying out to their own God. In fact, they said, hey, this is the only dude not crying out to his God, so maybe his God can fix this for us. They didn't believe in the one true God. And so they asked him, so they cast lots. Back in this culture, this time, that they were very superstitious people. And so they would cast lots to try to figure out. They thought that that would be the way that the gods would tell them why something was happening, that kind of thing. And so they cast lots, and it's ironic enough that God allowed the lot to fall on him, because I don't find that coincidental at all. I think God made that happen. And so they said, okay, so all right, it fell on you. Who are you? Like, they didn't even know Jonah well. He's on this boat. They're like, who are you? What kind of work do you do? You know, what's going on with you? Why, what country are you from? Why are you, why is it fell on you? What have you done to bring this upon us? Because they were very superstitious, karma, that kind of thing. And he's like, he told them basically, his deal. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is your fault. You're the reason we're doing this. And he's like, I know that I'm the reason this has happened to you. So my first point here that I want to make to you today is that when God tells you to do something or not to do something, or that there's a calling on your life, or there's something that you're participating in that you don't need to participate in anymore, whatever, and you choose to ignore it, you are not just ignoring yourself. You are not just limiting yourself. You are not just putting yourself at risk. And so for me, I know if I eat poorly, I'm affecting myself. But if I eat poorly to the point where I have a massive heart attack and die and leave my husband and my child at home alone, that is affecting more than just myself. Your bad decisions always affect more than just you. In this situation, there was a calling on Jonah's life. And it's not that he was scared to do it. It's not that he felt inadequate to do it. He just didn't like it, so he ran from it. And now, not only is his own life in jeopardy, but the life of some innocent bystanders who clearly are not children of God are in danger. And so, is there something that God is telling you to do that you're refusing to do that is ultimately going to be the reason some unbelievers don't accept Christ? Is you refusing to take the calling that has been placed on your life? Is your lack of action or lack of attention to a certain area going to be the reason that the unsaved family members that you have stumble and fall and go to hell when they die because you didn't step into what you were doing? Is your negligence to your calling, your negligence to the conviction you have in your own life, going to be the reason that our nation or your country, your community, your wherever stays in turmoil when you could be an advocate of change? You say, I'm not that powerful, Amy. I'm just so-and-so. I'm just a nurse that works at the hospital. I'm just a teacher who works at the school. I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm just a nothing. I'm just a this. I'm just a whatever. Jonah was just a prophet. They were not like fancy people, okay? Like, some of them come from priests and that kind of thing, but this was not a glorious, even well-respected thing at the time, because usually they spoke against what was actually going on. It's kind of like now, if you have a voice of reason for the Lord, you're usually going against whatever society says is good, normal, and accepted. That was not any different then than it is now. Jonah wasn't somebody who was a big deal. And he didn't run from his calling because he felt like it wasn't going to work. He didn't run from his calling because he thought, oh, I'm not a good enough speaker to get the point across to the Ninevites. Oh, I'm not, powerful enough. They're not going to listen to me. That wasn't even his deal. He knew God could speak through him regardless of how wicked the nation was or how unworthy or untalented he was. That was not his reason for not going. But is that your reason for not going? Is your reason for not standing up and saying what God has put on your heart to say? Are you holding back from that just because you don't like what he told you to say? just because you're scared of what people might say back, because you're scared of the judgment that they might have, or that you might accidentally offend somebody. I'm sure I've offended quite a few people. In fact, I've gotten more than one little, since we have the angry face emoji on these videos, I've had quite a few videos with angry faces. I'm still not sure exactly what I said to offend these people, but I haven't seen them back on the page since. And I hope, I don't want to misspeak, and I don't want to offend anybody, but sometimes the Word of God is offensive. Sometimes the will of God for your life isn't exactly what you wanted it to be. Sometimes it doesn't look like a big house, a nice car, and lots of money in the bank account. It may look like an impoverished life working as a missionary overseas, witnessing to people who hate Christians. What if that's your calling? Just because you don't like it, just because it's uncomfortable, you're not going to do it? What about those people? What, like I finished the video 2 days ago with, what if you're the Ninevite and your Jonah said, I don't care about her? What if you're the Ninevite and the person who was called to witness to you never did it? Now, I would dare to say that if you're watching these videos and you're probably a Christian or at least been in church to some extent, so that's not true for you. But what if it had been? What if your kid strays from God one day and they're living a life and there's somebody called to come alongside them that they'll listen to, and they won't listen to you, and they say, I don't care about them, they don't deserve it, I don't like them, they're different than me, I'm not witnessing to them because I don't feel like it. In fact, I'm not going to them, I'm going over here. Maybe God's not calling you to speak at church. Maybe God's calling you to speak in a prison. Maybe God's not calling you to teach a Sunday school class. He's calling you to do a Bible study in a bad side of town. Maybe God's not calling you to start some kind of like fancy ministry in your church. Maybe He's calling you to start something in your community to help people in need. Our communities need to be tied together a little better now more than ever. There's enough division. I've seen more of it on social media in the last week than I care to. And it happens over and over. We have cycles of this over and over again. And I can't help but to think that some of it is because the Jonah that was supposed to open their mouth and help the situation is asleep at the bottom of the boat. Is that you? Are you, Jonah, asleep at the bottom of your boat? Am I? Have I ignored God's calling? Have I ran from God to the point that I could help things, but I've been quiet because I'm downstairs taking a nap because I'm running from God? And now the whole sea is in turmoil because of my disobedience? Now these unbelievers are at risk for busting hell wide open because of my disobedience, because maybe they would have listened to me? Not me because I have anything relevant to say, but because God used me as a mouthpiece, because maybe that specific person or that specific population or that specific demographic would be responsive to me. There's a demographic that will be responsive to you. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's in your community. Maybe it's at your workplace. Maybe it's in your social group. But there's people who need you to live your life on purpose in front of them. And God, at some point, especially if you're trying to become more spiritually mature, God is going to call on you to say something that you think, oh. There's going to be Facebook posts that God asks you to make that you're like, I don't know about that one. But somebody's got to say it. Somebody's got to start something. We can't fix anything if everybody's too scared to say anything because they're not on the right side of the argument. And then I want to point out something else about Jonah. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh because he didn't like the Ninevites. He didn't think that they deserved forgiveness. He didn't think that they deserved grace. He didn't want to go witness to them because he knew that when he went that God would move and God would forgive them and then they wouldn't be punished for their bad actions. And he didn't like that because he didn't like the Ninevites. So he was not willing to go and put himself out and put himself in danger because they hated Christians, mind you. That's not, that's part of it too. He was not willing to risk his life or risk his comfort or risk his reputation to go talk to these people But yet when it's time, when the sea is thrashing and he's in this boat with these other non-believers, mind you, these are not men of God that he's on this boat with, he's willing to die to save these men. These men didn't want to throw him in the sea. He said, just throw me in the sea, and I know God will take care of you. Verse 12, pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm is upon you. The men didn't want to do that. The sailors didn't want to kill him. They tried to row back to sea. They threw the cargo in the sea, but it got worse. Whose situation are you making worse because of your disobedience? Whose life is harder? Whose storm is wilder because you refused to step into God's calling for your life? And they're not even going to blame you. The sailors weren't even mad at Jonah. They were trying to save all of them. They didn't want to kill him. But Jonah was willing to die for these sailors, but he was not willing to go and be uncomfortable and see the Ninevites saved. Are you more willing to die than to see people saved that you don't like? Are you willing to die for something? Are you willing to die in disobedience? To die sooner than it's your time to die, simply so that you don't have to see people that you don't think deserve grace get it. Just so you don't have to be an instrument of change in people that you don't think deserve a second chance. Is that you today? That was Jonah. He ran from God, hated the Ninevites, had all this in his life, just a hot mess of a Christian, willing to die for them, and they still said, no, we don't want to kill you. But what ended up happening? They ended up having to throw him in the sea, right? Verse 14, they cried out to the Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. They wound up doing it, but they didn't want to. These were non-believers, and they cared more about saving Jonah's life than Jonah cared, as a Christian, about saving the life of the Ninevites. Is that true now? Are there non-believers more worried about helping people than the Christians? Are you only worried about helping other Christians? Are you only worried about helping people that are in situations similar to yours? Are you only worried about people who have problems that aren't their own fault? Are you only worried about helping people who look like you? There are too many Christians who have been raised and you know, to believe and to react only to certain types of pain, only to certain types of suffering, only certain types of tribulation. You know, we want to help, you know, maybe there's a kid in an abusive home. Of course you want to help that child. But what about the man standing on the corner who's homeless? You assume things about that man that you don't assume about the kid. You look at the kid and you say it's not their fault that they were born into an abusive family. But you look at the man on the street and you say, well, he made his bed, now he can lay in. I bet he's a drug addict, or I bet he did this, or I bet he did that. You assume things about that man because of his situation in life, but you give the child the benefit of the doubt because you see an innocence in that child that you don't see in a grown man. Christ doesn't look at us like that. Jesus didn't say, oh, I'm only dying for the people who didn't make their own mess. I'm only dying for the people who were born into situations that they didn't have control over. He died for the person who screwed their own life up too. He died for the person who willfully sins every single day. He died for the person who murders people. He died for the people who do drugs every day. He died for the people who stole money. He died for the people who hurt people. He died for them just like he died for the people who have no control over the fact that they're in turmoil too. He died for every single one of us. And we've got to start looking at people like that instead of saying, well, I will help this person because this, but I'm not going to help that person like that. Because there's non-believers out here loving on people more than the Christians, and that's why don't nobody want Jesus. That's why don't nobody take you serious when you tell them that you're a Christian. That's why nobody cares when you say, I want you to come to church with me on Sunday. They don't want to come because there's non-believers out there loving on people better than the Christians. People get more acceptance and more help outside of the church than they do from the church. That's what happened here with Jonah. These sailors, these non-believers were trying to help Jonah. And the only reason Jonah needed help was because he was being punished for the fact that he would not go and witness to the Ninevites. Because he didn't like them. Not because he couldn't. Clearly he had the money to get to Nineveh because he spent the money to go to Tarshish on the boat. It's not that he didn't have the resources. It's not that he didn't have the time. It's not that he didn't have the ability. And it's not that he didn't know. He just didn't want to. And now he's got his life and all these sailors' lives in jeopardy. And given that he made his own bed, those people still felt sorry for him and didn't want him to be punished. They didn't want him to die. They didn't want to throw him off the boat. And they're not even Christians. Quit trying to manipulate things in your mind so that you feel better when you don't help somebody that you know needs help, that you could help them, but it doesn't look like what you would normally, like, I don't want to give my money to that. So I'm not going to, because they probably would have spent it on drugs anyway. They probably would have done this with it anyway. Or they should have done this with what they had. Like we rationalize this in our mind to the point where we don't feel bad for neglecting this person when we don't neglect that person. When there's non-believers out there helping them. I heard somebody say one time that they felt more welcome in a bar than they ever did in church. And they said, you know, they walked into a bar on a Saturday night or Saturday afternoon, and there's people saying, hey man, so glad you're here, hugging on them, just glad that they're there. And they go into church and nobody looks at them, nobody talks to them, nobody's glad that they're there, nobody does anything. They feel like an outcast and feel like they're judged for walking through the door. Y'all, we've got to do better. The church has got to do better. And it's not just how you treat people inside the four walls of the church that you have. It's how you treat people at the grocery store. It's how you treat people at the gas station. It's how you treat people when you run into them on the street. It's how you treat people on social media. It's how you respond to people. It's the facial expressions, the body language that you carry. We have got to do better. However, this is the silver lining to all of this. Jonah is a hot mess of a Christian. Like, if you want to say he's a good Christian or a bad Christian, like, he kind of sucks right here. Like, just real talk. He's not like getting gold stars on his Christian calendar, if there was such a thing. He was told to do something, he didn't do it, he ran from God, he endangered these people. Like, he didn't even feel bad about it until, you know, he saw how bad it really was. And then he's like, you know what, just kill me, it's fine. Like, he's not just like hitting on all cylinders here. But God. They throw Jonah in the sea. And then is verse 15. They took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Despite his disobedience, Jonah's in the middle of a heart change right here. Jonah's in the middle of seeing God for who he really is. Jonah's in the middle of having this epiphany with God that it really matters if he's obedient or if he's not. And so as Jonah's heart is changing, God is still working on those sailors. God is changing their hearts by his hand in Jonah's consequences. They saw that Jonah was, Jonah told them what he was supposed to be doing. Jonah told them what his calling was. Jonah told them that he was running from God. And they seen that the sea was bad, and they drew the lights, and it fell on Jonah. Like, everything's pointing to the fact that this is Jonah's fault. They throw him off the boat, the sea calms down. They see that the God Jonah says he worships, they see that the one true God is legit. It said in the beginning of this chapter that they had their own gods. They worshiped their own whatever. They had their own idol that they called on. But by the end of chapter 1, they saw that the one true God was legit. They not only saw it, recognized it, but it says they feared him, offered a sacrifice, and made vows to him. They just had a full-on conversion in the middle of the sea, simply because God handled Jonah. So let me tell you this. This is going to be my last thought for the day. You can ignore God's calling. You can ignore what God's telling you to do or not to do. You can run from him. You can fight him. You can do whatever you want. But God's going to use you. He's just either going to use you as an instrument or as an example. Quite frankly, I would rather him use me as an instrument and everybody be happy. Or at least, I know I'm being obedient and that comes with peace and protection and joy and gratification and fulfillment and all that stuff, rather than having the wrath of God poured out on my life and I'm literally floating in a raging sea alone because I ran from God. So if God has told you something or he's called you to something and you run from him, that's your prerogative. He's not going to force you to do what he wants you to do. However, if you are a Christian, he's going to use you one way or the other. And he can bring glory from anything. These men nearly died. They had a near-death experience. And because they saw what happened to Jonah, because they saw the power of God through Jonah's disobedience, that boat full of sailors became believers. God's able to use our mistakes to help other people come to know him. And it's usually going to be painful for me, for you, for us. God didn't call Jonah to prophesy to the sailors, but he took advantage of the situation while he was there. Who's in your ship? Who are you sailing with that you are endangering by your disobedience? Those are my thoughts for the day. Would love to know your thoughts. I'm going to be in Jonah chapter 2 in the next video. There's lots of stuff there. So read ahead. Share with me. Would love to. But otherwise, let's just close out in prayer and get out of here. So let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for the time we've had to spend here, and thank you for each and every person who will come across this. I pray, Lord, that it hits its intended target. Lord, I just hope that you speak to our hearts and help us to realize that our disobedience to you and your will for our lives is not hurting just ourselves, but it's hurting the people around us and hurting non-believers and hurting, it's not only just going to keep us stagnant and immature Christians, but it's also going to keep people out of the kingdom. And we'll answer for that one day. And there are consequences for that. And that, God, you can move in any circumstance and you are in control of everything. And there's nowhere we can run to get away from you or your will. And there's nothing that we can do to fight what you have called us to do. You're not going to force us to do it. But, God, we know that our best life is in the center of your will. So help us to see it. Help us to believe it. Help us to be bold and brave enough to step into it. Just forgive us of our sins and where we failed you, and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, y'all, I'm going to get out of here. But Jonah chapter 2 coming tomorrow, so y'all read ahead. So I love y'all. Be happy. Do good.